Chairman, you may proceed.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's special meeting of the Planning Commission. If I can, I'll call the roll here first, please. Barry Covington.
Here.
John Dewey.
Here.
Mike Strange.
Here.
Rachel Macha has advised that she will be absent. Jim Ellison.
Here. Can you hear me?
Jim is here. Jim, I think you're muted.
Wasn't sure which mic I was to use.
Mr. Ellison, you must speak into the microphone.
I'm here.
Very good. Julie Davis has advised she is late. She may make it, I hope. Dan Hunter.
Here.
And Steve Kaufman.
I'm here.
We have a quorum in the, I call the meeting to order. Ms. Womack, can you perhaps provide the verification of the meeting notice?
The agenda for the Planning Commission special meeting today was posted in City Hall and on the city portal on November 29th and was sent out from the portal the same day. That's all I have, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Any correspondence?
No, I've not received any.
Okay. The purpose of today's meeting, as noted on the agenda, is to the continued consideration of the revised comprehensive development plan. We have with us today Lauren Good of Wallace Montgomery, and of course the city planner, Tom West, as well as Glenn Mendalis. And thank you all for being here. We have as everyone knows, we have a short time to get there from here. And so we thank you for your participation. We have a special meeting today. We will have our regular meeting, the December meeting, this coming Friday, the 10th. The only two agenda items on that day will be 330 Rehoboth Avenue, the continuation of the consideration of the change of zone request, and the CDP. As far as today is concerned, the chair's discretion is to concerns public comment, and given the fact that we are having to spend as much time, which we of course are all committed to do, but the fact that we have a compressed schedule, I think justifies not having public comment today so that our deliberations can continue and move forward as best we can. I did want to announce today that the public comment period for the latest draft of the CDP will commence on December 21, 2021. Lauren Good, do I have that correct? I think she's muted. Okay, Lauren?
We will be providing that document to the city on that date, and that will be the start of that public comment period, yes.
Okay, thank you. All right. Lauren, I believe where we left off at the last meeting was on the slide for vision for business. My document is this beautifully colorful document, and which I have distributed to the members, and I hope everyone has that handy. And so I think let us again commence where we left off at our last meeting.
That is correct, and I will go ahead and share my screen. Can you see that all right?
Yes.
Great. All right. As you mentioned, we are going to pick up where we left off, but we just wanted to throw this, the full agenda up on the left side. You can see that we've gotten through a number of topic areas. So those first three visions. So as you mentioned, we're starting with that vision for business and continuing through the agenda that we had starting at the last meeting. Before I forget, I did want to just give a reminder to the Planning Commission members as well as the Board of Commissioners that we have submitted draft number 2 for your review, and we are requesting comments on those either via email or track changes or something like that in the document so that we can see those whatever comments that you have. The items that we are still addressing on today's agenda. So starting with that vision for business and then going forward, we have not made any revisions to those between draft numbers 1 and 2 so that we can make sure to incorporate your comments for the next draft that will come after that.
And what
So
date,
with
by,
that,
what date by which, what is the date by which you want us to have comments back on the current draft?
Sure, my apologies. I think we had originally identified Wednesday, December 8th, the end of the day, for those comments to come back to us.
That's the date that I show on my schedule, so that's consistent with what I have.
Great.
All right, thank you. Let's
All right.
proceed.
So jumping right in. As you'll recall, we wanted to first have a discussion about the current vision. So this is the vision for business, noting that the downtown is a balanced mix of year-round and seasonal businesses with a distinctive pedestrian character. And then related to that vision is the vision statement shown on the left-hand side of this screen, noting that the downtown is readily identifiable, non-uniform in terms of its mix of businesses. It has a control of architecture and signage. Residential scale of buildings is linked to its surroundings. The downtown is oriented to pedestrians and cyclists, with automobile second, and contains a mix of private and public uses, year-round and seasonal operations, and dominated by locally owned small businesses. So first, we wanted to open the discussion just to make sure that this statement still reflects how you would like to see the city continue, or if you would like to see any changes to this vision statement. So for now, please just ignore the city positions section, and we will get to that momentarily. And let's just focus on the vision and the vision statement. So with that, I'll open it up if anyone has any comments.
Members of the commission.
I have some comments.
Okay, Commissioner Kaufman, please.
Well, last night, Rachel sent me some statements that she wanted to make on this particular vision, and I'll just read them to you. She says, we need to address the impact of online shopping and the visibility of sustaining small mom and pop shops in Rehoboth. We can't afford to lose our merchants. We must find ways to change the current relationship with the city and our business community. Businesses don't feel valued or heard by the city. The city doesn't respond to their needs / ideas and concerns. Landlords are raising rents and not maintaining their properties, which also impacts merchants' decisions to stay in Rehoboth. And then she recommends that the mayor and the commissioners hold business community meetings monthly or on some schedule to more closely connect the business development strategy to retaining and attracting new businesses. Those are her comments.
Okay.
Which I agree with those. And, I think that we need to consider the business community's needs in terms of potential redevelopment of certain key strategic locations, for example, the Papa John piece. Those are my thoughts.
All right, sir. Anyone else?
Mike,
Yes, sir.
I haven't read the draft number 2, but I did reread the 2010 CDP, and the language in there seems to echo what Rachel said, in the sense that, I'll just quote what it says here, in a search for an appropriate means to manage the visual and historic texture of Rehoboth Beach of the future, city realizes that community design is both an art and a science, and appropriate solutions are difficult to prey to many political and economic judgments. It also realizes it views as the community needs may not match the economic needs of all potential applicants. To this end, the city will examine means to be flexible as possible in the administration of any regulations, preserve the freedom to build for an applicant who is working to produce a thoughtful and responsive addition to the community. And it seems to me that should be part of our vision. So I don't know if that's being incorporated into the draft or not. So any comments on that?
Hi, Mike, this is Nan speaking.
Yes.
I guess the concerns that I have about that, first, Barry, I would just ask which page of the 2010 CDP?
Page 79.
Okay. I mean, because there are many references in the 2010 CDP to the mix of concerns that all of us have concerning the community. And I get concerned when, and Rachel, I think, has referred to this in her written comments, but there seems to be this statement that I think all of us are not, do not hear, shall we say, in terms of voices from the community with regard to business interests not being heard, or the setting aside of special meetings with business owners, which sounds like it would be to the exclusion of, for example, the homeowners association or the interest of residents. So to me, this discussion really takes us directly into the question of balance and the question of priorities. And none of us wants to see the merchants downtown being driven out of downtown. It does not appear to me, from my observation, that is a major concern at the moment. I mean, my major concern when I go downtown is trying to get into a restaurant without having to wait an hour or two. Even in the off season, even on a weeknight. I mean, this has recently happened to me several times. So I'm thrilled by the fact that at least some parts of our business community seem to be doing an exceptionally good job of maintaining their clientele and growing along with the city. So I really hesitate to put into the CDP this concern that makes it sound as though business is on the downturn, or that our business community is on the downturn, or that our business or developers, which is of more concern to me, need sort of more accommodations than are reflected in the current, zoning code and building code requirements. I think we have to understand that these code requirements reflect what the community has long stated to be its preference, which is for a residential scale, and for the business district to also reflect in its own way the same kind of residential scale, and in general, the same sorts of architectural and design criteria that are compatible with the residential scale of the city. So that's my concern about sort of going down the path of putting in really pretty amorphous language. I mean, I'm sure that we have residents. I'm sure that we have preservationists who are concerned with the history of the community. We certainly have environmentalists, persons who feel like they don't get enough attention or don't get all of the kinds of policy developments from City Hall that they would prefer. So my desire would be to leave this vision statement basically as is, because I think it does reflect the tone of the community.
Nan, I have no problem with the vision statement. I just want to know if the language I just read is going to be incorporated into the final document, because I think to take it out when it was in there in 2010 implies that we're going away from finding ways to work with businesses and developing properties within Rehoboth Beach. For example, like 330 or the Clear Space or the hotel for the Papa John's. I just think we need to be guided by that sort of language.
Well, I've read the 2010 CDP, and I haven't had the chance to go in these last few moments to page 79. And I think it is appropriate to look through the 2010 CDP, but there are many different statements within that document of what the priorities are, and I think the overall thrust of it is to prioritize the residential feel and the small scale nature of Rehoboth Beach, and to plan and control development so that it is compatible with that. And I certainly don't doubt, Barry, that it's there, but I think it would perhaps be useful to look for other ways that the vision statement was included in the 2010 plan.
I understand what you're saying, Jan, but I think that we do need something here that indicates that the city going forward needs to strongly support the business community. I don't have a problem with the residential scale, but the issue, as was raised before, I think by you and I agreed with, there's a balance. And I think you need to have something in here which indicates, by the way, a number of businesses have left the city and are leaving the city. And some were coming in and decided not to come in because of the rigorous regulations that they had to meet. So I think we need something here that indicates that the city will continue to strongly support its businesses and encourage them going forward. So that's
just in quick response to that. First of all, my name is Nan. So
I'm sorry. I said Jan. I meant to say Nan. I'm sorry.
I promise not to call you Dave. Okay, so if you'll call me Nan.
You can call me that. That's okay.
Believe me, I've been called much worse than Jan, so I'm not going to make a point of it. But I think it's important to have data about. I mean, I know that there are restaurants that have left the city, I think largely as a product of success and wanting, more space than there is in the city, or wanting access, having a large contiguous parking lot, which is certainly understandable, which is, not going to happen within our town. But, we've got a very, very vigorous influx, I think, of businesses that are filling spaces when businesses leave. And the other thing with regard to the code requirements, my understanding, and I would, look to others on the commission for more information about this. My understanding is that if you compare us, for example, with Lewis, that there are a number of ways in which Rehoboth is more flexible, shall we say, in terms of its requirements. If you compare us to Cape May, if you compare us to other comparable communities. And so I would object to the CDP communicating what I believe is an inaccurate message, that Rehoboth has erected barriers that other comparable towns have not erected to the development of the kinds of businesses and services that realistically are going to be in Rehoboth, and that are of the kind that we want to be in Rehoboth.
Well, Nan, one other thing. The 2010 CDP does not take into account the fact that the city is now in a significant competition with the development along the main highway. And there are a number of empty restaurants in the city. So I don't totally disagree with a lot of what you're saying, but I think there needs to be something here that reinforces a strong commitment to the business community. I don't know where others are. Barry and I are there, and Ray So
Yeah,
I don't know what the rest of
I think the
the,
language I read again doesn't
Yeah.
say the city is not doing its job or is keeping businesses away. I just think it's a reinforcement to people who want to do business within the community that the city's here to help not only the businesses when they come in and make sure they fit within the atmosphere of Rehoboth Beach. We also recognize the visitors as well as the residents. So it's just part of that three-legged stool.
all right.
The one thing I wanted to kind of just throw in and putting my hat on as a planner and a process. And I think this is as good a time as any to mention this, although it's not just this vision statement or this topic. But what we're doing here on the CDP is trying to create a policy, a consistent policy, one that can be applied by staff and by the future planning commissions and Board of Adjustment that provides a clear direction on topics such as redevelopment. And I think there's a lot of agreement on redevelopments needed in the city in some form or another. But I think we start talking about the where and how and when. So I think it's vital to point out that looking at the 2010 plan and what it said about it, and hearing some of the concerns about it's not clear, the ordinances aren't clear, there's different interpretations. Whatever we do as the Planning Commission with this document, at the end, when we do this vision statement and then we look at the goals that Lauren's going to look at in the action statements, I don't think that there's going to be one, everybody agrees with all the positions, but at the end of the day, that there is a clear set of actions that we know what mixed use means, and we know how these are being applied and what's the direction on it. So I just want to, I think that the points that we're making here are obvious, or they're common sense. There's different perspectives on this issue, but I just want to point out as a planner in this process that at the end of it, what we're hoping for is to come up with something that is clear, that we can, we don't all agree on, but it's a consensus to move forward so that when we do write ordinances or we do have variance hearings, is clear. So I just wanted to throw my hat in on that. I don't disagree with anything that's already been said. It's just, I want to throw in my 2 cents about process of what we're trying to achieve here.
Mr. West, thank you. I concur with that and might interject here as well that we really are trying to, in my view, we are trying to develop what the future process will be it for the Planning Commission, board, whatever other board you might want to talk about, but certainly from the Planning Commission standpoint, we need to know what the process is. And we're not here, as I perceive it, to necessarily decide what, for example, the FAR should be, or what mixed-use zoning should be, per se. We're here to make recommendations, and I'm asking each of you to find a way, if you can, to come to some resolution. As Tom pointed out, no one's going to get everything they want. Otherwise, we'd have just one member write the CDP. So given the fact that we have a very dynamic and great group here, to the extent you can, please consider developing a consensus that we can then move forward on and put into the future CDP. The alternative to that is having to basically vote on issues that are still objected by some and not accepted by others. And I'm hoping to avoid that. I'd much rather have a product that incorporates everyone else's thoughts, but perhaps doesn't, but gives some consideration to the thoughts of others, if we can do that. So thank you.
If I can step in here, I've had
Yes.
my hand up for quite a while. I think we need to remember that right now we're talking about a vision statement. We're not into the details of redevelopment or other things. And the vision statement is a statement of a condition we wish to exist in the city. And I could easily see a statement added to this one that simply says that, in whatever language, that the citizens and the leaders of the city are in full support of the businesses of the city, something of that order. I think that would be an appropriate condition that we would wish to be in place in the future in Rehoboth Beach. But I think beyond that, then we're kind of getting into the, into the details.
Okay, Lauren, could you please, I'm not able to see all the commission members that are participating, so I didn't see Mr. Ellison's hand. Can you at least, or Max, can I at least have that, be able to view all the commission members that are participating today, as well as Tom West and Glenn and Lauren? There you go. Thank you very much. Mr. Strange.
Yes, it's interesting. I agree with what everyone said, even though it's conflicting. But Tom, I think, said something that's very important. This is a use of land document. And I think at this point, we're talking about balance between all the conflicting objectives that we'll deal with later. And so I think, Mike, your observation is absolutely correct. So I think Stephen's position is a very good one, but I think not in this particular place at this point in time. But it will be adjudicated later, if you will, as further down the line within the CDP. Thanks, that's it.
Okay. Anyone else?
I think Jim's statement, I thought that was very good. That was very good. And I think that could be something that's added here. And then we can deal with more details later on. But I thought Jim Ellison's statement was a very good one.
I would go further in what Jim stated, because it's obvious. Of course, everyone's for business. Everyone's for the residents. Everyone is for a nice experience. So just to put that in there is really meaningless. I think we need to be flexible in how we allow our city to go forward.
Well, he indicated strongly in there. I thought that was good.
Well, I didn't hear that, so.
Well, I think that I think it's true that to some extent, if what we want is a kind of symbolic statement of the community's support of our businesses and our business district, I think we can probably all agree on that. And I certainly don't have any objection to that. My objection is with the implication that there has been insufficient support in the past, and that our businesses are suffering as a result of current city policies. So that's my problem with how the discussion has been framed. It certainly isn't a problem with supporting our businesses.
My last word on this. I don't think what I read earlier implies that the city has been complicit in trying to, keep business out. I think it's just stating a fact that, we all have different ideas of where the community should be, and the city is being encouraged to look for ways to improve Rehoboth Beach, not just go by what's black and white, but to use some creativity and developing our downtown. And I'll be quiet.
Anyone else? John, Mr. Dewey.
Yeah, if I could jump in here. In my experience, vision statements are generally more effective when they are more concise. I understand that there's some concerns to make sure that the business community feels supported. There are open channels of communication. But as I'm reviewing the document and thinking about the work that we have ahead of us, I think that there will be time and opportunity to make sure that those concerns are not only reflected, but that there would be an opportunity to set specific goals. I particularly appreciate that Jim brought in an additional statement that could be used to sort of broaden the vision statement as it's currently in draft form. And I think that might be a way to tie things together on behalf of the committee.
Lauren, good. Have you heard what you need to hear?
I believe so.
Good. That's good news.
I think that what I'm hearing is that if we keep the existing vision statement as is, but add in the the language that citizens and city leaders support business, not with the implication that they have not been in the past. But if we round out the existing statement with a sentence to that effect, and then either in the city positions or more of the goals and implementation items, we get into addressing the more specific concerns, that's a better place to do that. And just to respond to a much earlier comment regarding the information on page 79 for draft 2, which I just wanted to again reiterate that the conversation today is based on draft number 1, but this we have not made changes relating to the items we'll be discussing today in draft number 2, so they're essentially the same as far as these topics are concerned. But in draft number 2, we did expand the section on community character, and that's where some of the language from the 2010 plan, page 79 and thereabouts, was additionally brought in.
Okay. All right, are we ready for the next topic?
All right. So as part of the this topic area, there are 2 city positions that we are wanting to define. And the first is to define a city position on redevelopment potential. Guidance from the Office of State Planning indicates that this position on redevelopment potential should be informed by revitalization or redevelopment needs, infrastructure, and economic development activities. So we had a range of comments from the Planning Commission come in everything from being in favor of redevelopment of the commercial areas, but in the context of maintaining the existing character of those areas and surrounding neighborhoods, noting that particular parcels would benefit from redevelopment, and noting some of the recent or ongoing revisions to the city code that would support redevelopment in various ways, noting that redevelopment should be in the character of the community. Future uses should be consistent with residential and pedestrian scale, and that there's a heightened concern for environmental protection that needs to be kept in mind. Another note that is looking at some of the fiscal implications that redevelopment or increasing the commercial side will help to rebalance some of the residential property taxes, and that the vast majority of residents want to maintain low property taxes. Noting that redevelopment is essential to Rehoboth's future vitality, and that any rundown or vacant buildings would signal a declining resort town, which would then turn away visitors, et cetera. And then the last comment on this is that redevelopment of commercial areas should be encouraged, taking into account the need to maintain existing character of commercial areas and surrounding residential neighborhoods. So with that, we wanted to just get your take on what an appropriate city position for redevelopment potential should be. Are any of these particular comments speaking to you, or is there something else to bring up, or something that has been noted in here that is not appropriate?
Anyone of the commission? I mean, these all look like very positive goals.
The only thing I would add here is that you should be taking a look at your potential for a new zone, a new mixed-use zone that can be applied during the 18-month time, be created during the 18-month time after the development, the the new plan has been adopted, because it'll take much longer to totally look at the whole code and recommend changes to the whole code. So the city needs some kind of a tool to use for the 1 or 2 or even 3 years that we're going to run into between the adoption of the new comprehensive development plan and a total redo of our codes. And one of the things I recommended was that we bring in a qualified consultant to work with our city planner to develop such a tool for us to use. That doesn't necessarily mean it be used uniformly everywhere. It's just a zoning code change or addition that could be applied as an overlay on specific properties. That's the only thing I would recommend. I don't know if this is the place to put it or put it in the implementation section.
Well, it seems to me that I imagine that we're going to talk a fair amount about mixed use, and so I think it is a question of, sort of defining it first, or having a shared understanding of what that means. So, I'm not sure. As I understand it, the city position statements go toward the front or toward the beginning of the document. So it might be more useful to kind of circle back after we've had the discussion of mixed use and figure out how, whether and how to integrate it. The thing I would to comment on what's on the slide, the one in the bullet point, actually a very short bullet point at the top of the right-hand column about future uses to be consistent. I think that could be expanded a little bit in the same, along the same lines of that future uses would be consistent and compatible with the city's existing residential and commercial scale, particularly related to issues with regard to pedestrian orientation or architectural character or scale or density. It seems to me that those are the key components that shape how particular balancing decisions will be made. And also, I agree with the second sentence in that bullet point, the heightened concern for environmental protection.
Anyone else? Steve, Mr. Kaufman, you previously made mention of mixed use type zoning. Just as a digression for a minute, can you tell us what you think when you say that? What is it you're envisioning that could come about?
Well, you would have a zone to allow for a mix of commercial and residential uses with criteria within it that would allow for height and bulk, and also architectural standards to be used. And like that would have probably 2 levels. You would have a standard method of development, which is a matter of right. And then you would have an optional method of development, which would allow for much more flexibility in return for amenities that would benefit the community. You would probably have within that zone a section for commercial and a section for residential. And then you would have in that a criteria that would have a range of FAR and a range of uses, and to be applied specifically to a specific property. And a property owner would come in and apply for the zone to be applied as the overlay to the property, and would seek, a certain level of development for commercial and a certain level of development for residential. And in that way, you could have a property that would have retail, would have commercial, would have residential in the mix. And That's the type of zone I'm thinking about, which would have a standard method and an alternative method.
Okay, is that sort of the bonus
Alternative method.
Is it basically
Yeah.
the bonus system?
Right.
If you do certain things, you can have greater
I meant,
freedom
yeah,
to
right.
develop.
Right. For example, if you provided some workforce housing or affordable housing, you could have some benefits from that would allow you to have perhaps a little more density. That's the type of zone I'm talking about.
Commissioner Dewey.
Stephen, if I could ask you to further define what you mean by the term residential. There's a lot of conflicted discussion about what's included in residential.
Well, in the residential side, you would have a potential for apartments within the project, or you would have a potential for both apartments and condominiums in the project. The idea of having apartments would allow for workforce housing, so the people who work in the city might be able to afford a rent. In the county that I practiced in, we had a moderate price dwelling unit legislation, which indicated that if you provided a certain amount of affordable housing, you could have some benefits in return. But there are other things such as infrastructure improvements to be provided for the city by the developer in terms of utilities and other things, even road improvements, that type of thing.
And Stephen, thank you for providing that clarification, because in other city meetings, the word residential in the context of mixed-use zoning has been taken to include hotel rooms. And so I think as we continue this discussion, and I'm not wishing to pin anybody down at this early point of the discussion, but based on things that have happened recently and other meetings and decisions made by other entities, any term that we put down in this document, in my point of view, is going to have to be very, very clearly defined, because people have taken, they've cherry picked terms out of the 2010 CDP and they have run with it. And so that's a concern that I'm going to continue to bring to this discussion as it unfolds.
Thank you, John. In my mind, hotel rooms are a commercial use. It's not a residential use, it's a commercial use. Okay. So I agree with you that as we create such a zone and we go into the various uses that are permitted in it, we have to define them very carefully.
I mean, one concern that I have is that mixed uses in the future may be appropriate in our business district, in areas that are zoned commercial, for example, residential housing, workforce housing, or for example, above businesses, which I think has occurred in Rehoboth and certainly has occurred in other similar towns like Rehoboth. And I think that's, those are interesting issues to consider. What I am much more concerned about is using a mixed use, as you will, as a kind of intrusion into what are currently residential zoned areas. So that, in other words, the density in residential areas that is now less would be enhanced, rather than the usage of commercial or business districts for residential purposes as well. So that's another, I think, dimension, along with the one that John mentioned, where, at least in my mind, I think we need to be very specific and very clear, so that we're not talking about different ideas using the same words.
In my mind, the mixed use zone that I was envisioning would be just in the commercial areas. If you're talking about mixed use in the residential areas, what you're talking about there is a unit type more than a introduction of any commercial use, such as townhouses or apartments or whatever you want. The use of the cluster zone, for example, in residential zoned areas would allow for very aesthetically pleasing development and perhaps a little bit more density. But mixed use in a residential zone would be mostly unit types in density. That's what I had envisioned.
Okay. All right. Anyone else? Mr.
Yeah,
Mr. Ellison.
Steve, when you spoke earlier on, when you were talking about, encouraging redevelopment, which is a real tough thing. I was,
Sure.
Well, it is, what are the means?
No, I agree.
I
agree it is.
And you've listed the one, but I thought maybe you were heading someplace else with other kinds of, zones or overlays or something beyond just the one that we've discussed.
Jim, you could have a number of zones. I was just thinking in the interim of a zone that could be used on the major commercial parcels that are seeking redevelopment in the city. But for example, you could have a series of what we call town center zones, which allow for different levels of density. You got to, right now my dog is barking. I don't know if you can hear her or not, but you could have a mix of town center zones, which would allow for different levels of density and could provide for some small commercial, for example, in a residential area just to service that particular group of residential properties. But I was just speaking about in the interim between the time of adoption of the CDP and the time that we actually do a total code revision. And that's going to take some time. And we can't just do nothing. We have to have a tool to use.
Mr. Strange.
Yeah, Steve has brought up some very important issues, and I think if we look at the guidance from the Office of State Planning and Budget, State Planning, it says clearly articulated position on redevelopment, and I think the clearly articulated position, the less we say, the better off we are, because we don't know what's going on in the future. And I think the answer would be yes, we're in favor of redevelopment. By way of example, in a similarly situated jurisdiction such as ours, in fact, almost the exact same size, Carmel by the Sea, California, has 25 overlay zones in their 1.6 mile area, covering a multitude of issues and a multitude of balance between their commercial districts and their residential districts, and even within their residential districts and their commercial districts. So it is, as Steve pointed out, and I agree completely, it is an exceedingly complex issue. And I think, quite frankly, the city is better off just saying, yes, we agree, period, and not go into a lot more detail at this time, because we really can't, because we don't have the tools or anywhere near the amount of research that's required before you get into it.
That may circle back, I think, Mike Strange, to Steve's thought about having basically a professional come in and look at the zoning code. Is that right, Steve?
Yeah, that's correct. I definitely agree with Mike that it's very complex, and we're going to need the help of a really well-qualified consultant or group of consultants to work along with Tom. But notwithstanding that, we have to do something in the almost immediate future that allows the city to move forward in some respect with some of these commercial properties. And so that's why I've suggested this one mixed-use zone, which could be developed by a consultant with our planner's help, and have put in legislatively for the commissioners to adopt with a full public review of it. And I don't know where Glenn is on that, but I think we need something.
Well, I guess I'm a little confused about whether we're talking now about specific properties.
Well, that's why it's an overlaid zone, man. In other words, it's not a zone that would be applied to an area. It would have to be applied for by a property owner, and it would have to go through a series of tests before it was applied.
No,
that's used in all parts of the country.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I appreciate that, Steve. I just, I just have some concern that there's a sort of an unspoken list of particular particular properties or particular areas sort of within the commercial, what is now zoned commercial. And if we are, and if that is the case, then I think it would make some sense to just sort of put that on the record.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why it would be one that the applicant would have to apply for, not be comprehensive. It would not be a comprehensive rezoning. It would only be an overlay zoning category that could be applied for by property owners.
I would just, we're talking about a position statement here, and I think Mr. Strange's comments appropriate here. We look later on in the goals and action statements, and I think that's where we get into the where and the how and the whens. I think our position, that what we're looking for here is what's the city's position on redevelopment. And the slide had a lot of good, I think, what is a position? You know, it's a high level policy. It's not the goals, but I do think that these discussions are all good. But as Mr. Kaufman said when he first started, I think that the details of where, when, and how it's done come later on in the document.
Yes, that's where I was.
I agree.
I was going to ask if perhaps Mr. Strange.
I'm fine with that.
Okay, Mr. Strange's position could be the consensus of the group. And Mike, if you need to restate that, please do.
Yes.
I took the OSPC guidance and said the city position is we're in favor of it.
Okay. Does anybody have an objection to that? All right, Ms. Good.
All right, thank you. Moving on, the next city position that we will need to discuss, it relates to critical community development issues. For this one, state planning guidance notes that we should have a position on those issues that's informed, again, by revitalization and redevelopment needs, infrastructure, and economic development activities. So this is very similar to the previous, but this is more of the less of the economic development or business side of things, and more of what may be needed as far as example for housing redevelopment or any community facility needs or things of that nature. So the first one we discussed is more of the economic development side, and this is more of the any other development side of things. So some of the comments that we received here is that the city, like many other smaller communities, is under pressure that makes it challenging for maintaining the characteristics of the city that brought so many people here, so that smaller town atmosphere, and that effort should be made to support those different parties while looking at different changes that could support the shared vision of a traditional Mid-Atlantic seaside town. Again, part of this may get more into the specifics for the goals and action items part, but more generally looking at this comment and taking out the bigger picture items here. Additional note that Main Street needs to stay in Rehoboth, and that businesses and residents want the arts, culture, and entertainment aspects. There should be unity within the community, whether that's with volunteer opportunities to help those less fortunate, or a more organized process to engage residents and businesses in a variety of special projects. There was a note about a focus on improving customer experience. So that's more of an operational issue. Again, a discussion of some of the mixed use housing that's in the core of the city, and preservation of unique environmental assets. And then also this echoes part of the previous conversation about being accommodating to the business community by encouraging growth that improves the character and charm of new buildings. So any comments, questions, or thoughts on a position for critical community development issues?
Mr. Dewey.
One thought that I would like to put out there, wherever it winds up getting pegged in a short vision statement, but I would like to see something reflecting inclusion and recognizing that we have an aging population in our town, and that needs to be addressed in terms of infrastructure issues, and particularly community amenities, not the least of which being beach access over the dune and access to appropriate bathrooms. I'm not looking for that detail in a vision statement, but rather that the terms inclusion and recognizing the needs of an aging community somehow or another are reflected in the vision statement.
Okay. Mr. Kaufman.
First, I like this. I don't have any problem with this this particular group of statements. I did want to clarify to John, when I talked about mixed use, certainly hotel rooms would be permitted. They would just be commercial. They would not be considered residential. So in a mixed use zone, you would permit hotel rooms, but they would be part of the commercial part of the project, not part of the residential part of the project.
Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah.
Anyone else? This does seem to dovetail with some of the ground we've already traveled over. Anyone have any objections to what has been outlined here on this slide? Okay, Lauren, next slide, please.
All right, so that ends the specific discussion of the vision statements, and city positions. So stemming from those and wanting to keep those in mind, we're now transitioning into discussions of topic areas and the goals and action items that are that have been established already. So for example, on the screen right now, under environmental protection, current goals aim to maintain the physical and visual access to the ocean and water bodies, control the scale and use of structures along the same, protect natural functioning of the ocean, bay, lake, and canal ecology, preserve, protect, and conserve existing trees and forests, and establish an approach to environmental planning with an emphasis on trees, plantings, natural areas, and maintenance. Related to those action items that were
Lauren?
Developed include,
Lauren?
yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I don't see it on the screen right now. And I don't know if others.
I would
cannot
like to see it on the screen as well.
Maybe just pop it up while you're talking about it, and then when members are discussing it, we take it down. That would be.
That, can you see it now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Related to those goals are the action items related to them, and that includes continued refurbishment of the boardwalk and beach replenishment, encouraging and supporting environmental best management practices, using buffer plantings, dredging, and buffer zones related to Silver Lake, preparing a community forest plan, and investigating a city policy for municipal facilities, city-funded projects, and city infrastructure that they are constructed, renovated, operated, maintained, using green building, low-impact development, or conservation landscaping principles. Way back when, toward the start of this process, and that was many years ago in 2016, part of the initial outreach with the Planning Commission was a review of the existing goals and action items in the 2010 plan, whether commission members wanted to keep what was there, whether they were still relevant, whether different action items have been completed, etc. So these goals and action items really in part came from that discussion, and these were primarily developed under the previous planning consultant And based on her conversations with the Planning Commission and others, these were what resulted. So we fully understand that these are not necessarily, these are not the final goals or action items, but they were meant as a starting point for this discussion that's more specific to goals and action items related to each of these topic areas. So for each slide for the various topics, you'll see one that goes over the goals and action items that's in the draft plan currently. So based on that, we had a number of suggested additional action items that had comments. So those are listed out here. And this is a similar format that we're using for each of these topics. Any suggested additions or changes to the goals or action items, and then any general comments that we wanted to bring back and make sure everyone could come to some agreement with. So some of the additional action items suggested were to look into ways to strengthen the Dark Skies initiative to reduce the impact of light pollution on the visual and natural environment. And for those of you that aren't as familiar, Dark Skies is really meant to, during nighttime hours, keep the sky as dark as possible to help environmentally. So any of the little critters that are reliant on that daytime, nighttime function to do their little critter things. We maintain that, and just to make sure that we don't add to light pollution, etc. The second point is to complete the master tree planting plan and the priority street plan. Another that proposals for oceanfront structures should be subject to site plan review. There should be LEED certification requirements and other green building practices for major new construction. There should be installation of additional electric vehicle charging stations. The city should transition to an all-electric city vehicle fleet. There should be standards adopted for compliant lighting on city properties. And I believe that that goes back to that Dark Skies initiative. And then the last comment was to consider lighting review standards for subdivision site plans and redevelopment projects. So here we want to see, are these items that you are in favor of, against? Are there others that aren't currently discussed that should be? Are some of the ones that are discussed, should they be removed, etc.? And with that, I will throw it back to you all for your comments.
Can you put us all back on the screen there?
Good.
So I'll start this again. I'm in favor of all of these. The only thing I would add is I think the city should take responsibility for the sidewalks, for constructing them and maintaining them. That's all required to be done by the individual homeowner. Some of them are good repair, some of them in terrible repair. And I don't have a problem with the city charging a homeowner for the construction if it's a new development or repair, but the city should take responsibility as part of its infrastructure responsibilities of the sidewalks in the city so that they're safe and uniform.
Anyone else? Barry Covington.
Yeah, with regard to Silver Lake, a specific action item is you have dredging. I don't know where that came from, and I don't even know if that's environmentally necessary or helpful, or maybe it's not environmentally helpful to dredge. So I would just be careful using that language until we know that it should be done. And the other thing that I have some concern with is the statement, all proposals for oceanfront structures should be subject to site plan review. Right now, that'd be a change in, I guess, the ordinance, right, to do that?
Yes.
I would not like it.
I would say yes, but Lauren, correct me if I'm wrong, that's in the 2010 plan? That same action item. Not to say that it shouldn't be in here, but to Mr. Covington's point, it's in the current plan, and it hasn't been implemented yet, which goes back to, I think, some of the things that we're talking about is when we propose goals and action items, are they things we intend to follow through with? That's just as important as being clear and consistent. But Mr. Covington's point's good, is if this is not something that should be done in the course of this comprehensive plan or comprehensive development plan, we should not leave it in there.
I would just say that I think it's overdue. My understanding is that the idea of having site plan review specifically for anything that's along our ocean front and along our boardwalk has been proposed before, but I think we should. There are a number of things that the 2010 plan proposed that haven't yet been implemented, but I think many of us would like to re-emphasize them rather than de-emphasize them. And this is one that I very much support. That's essential to, nothing is more essential to the character of the city than the nature, the design, and the protection of the oceanfront and the structures. So I would very much favor keeping it in. The other thing that I would just say with regard to this, since we're talking about environmental protection, is that, for example, back on the first side, if you will, of this topic that is not for the suggested additional action items, the environmental protection more generally. I don't disagree with those, but I do think, for example, the last goal, establish a comprehensive approach to environmental planning with special emphasis on trees, plantings, and so forth. The only issue I have with that is that I think that over the course of the last 12 years, I think that our special emphasis and our focus in terms of environmental protection has expanded, so that I wouldn't write it in a way that suggests that the focus on trees and plantings and the Dark Skies Initiative and so forth in any way should take priority over issues like sea level rise and the specific impact that I think we can count on seeing, even if we can't predict exactly what it will be, over the next 10 years of climate change. So I think that sort of throughout our approach to the environmental protection planning, I think we need to remember that our knowledge base as a society has shifted considerably in the last 12 years, and that our concerns as stewards of the environmental assets we have in Rehoboth should expand along those lines. And I think that the flavor, if you will, of the environmental protection sections tends to be more toward preservation of things like parks and trees and so forth, and not as much as it should be in terms of the defense against changes or unnatural or atypical, shall we say, changes in what the environmental threats will be. So I don't have any specific language to propose at this particular moment, but I do think that's the major change in tone that we should look for in the next CDP from what it was in the last CDP.
And could you please adjust your microphone so that we can hear you a little better? Thank you.
You know, all I'll say is that the building code deals with a lot of the issues about development of houses on the ocean front. So I think subjects are already taken care of. And I think there's probably some sort of requirements too for the dunes and the dune line and all that. I just think it's subjecting a property owner to another process that's going to have a body oversee what they can do and what they should do versus what they want to do.
Okay, anyone else? Lauren, good. The next topic, please.
Right. The next is regarding open space and recreation. So the current goals related to that include preserving, protecting, maintaining, improving, and enhancing existing natural resources, parks, and recreational opportunities, building a healthier community through innovative and diversified parks, arts, recreation, leisure, and cultural opportunities, and preparing a long-range development, renovation, and maintenance plan for the city's parks and recreation spaces. Related action items include continuing to effectively promote and publicize area recreational events, continuing to maintain parks and open space areas while promoting sustainable environmental practices, and increasing educational opportunities throughout the city, city-owned parks and recreation properties with community partners for events and informational placards. So some suggested additional action items were to identify an appropriate location for, and then to design and construct a dog park. And then the desire for a long-range plan for the parks and recreation spaces to be developed along with the budget cycle. So this date here, I think, was just noted as far as the next round where this would take place, but basically while the budget considerations are taking place, having more of a park and recreation plan developed in conjunction with that. And then a general comment for consideration, and this does relate to one of the noted action items, was that some people feel that there are already too many events within town, especially races, and that language should be reconsidered. So those are the comments that we heard on this item, and I will go ahead and put this back onto the video, or I guess stop sharing so the video part pops back up.
Any comments from the commissioners? Okay, Lauren. Now, I'm not sure, Lauren, you had one complaint about the number of races, road races. Other than that, it seems the consensus is to go forward, and no one here actually came down to opine on that particular item. So do you have what you need to move forward?
If I could just add a comment regarding the road races. I live on Scarborough Avenue, and sometimes I'm actually, on that route. So it's actually kind of cool. 7:30 in the morning, I get to watch the parade go by. It's great. But I would like to offer some feedback to the city that, the city really does, I think, given the staffing shortages in the police department, they've done an outstanding job organizing around this, keeping people safe, having equipment set up ahead of time, getting it torn down as soon as they can afterwards. I just think they've really been exceptional at this.
Well, maybe it will make us all be a bit embarrassed that we're not out there running with them.
I just have to add that I live on Henlopen Avenue, and every race goes up and down my street, and I don't mind them at all. They're fun.
Good. All right, Ms. Good.
The next topic area relates to housing. So here, the goals current goals are to protect historic and characteristic structures, to increase awareness with new housing developments located in neighboring municipalities and Sussex County that occur around the city, to examine establishing a mixed-use zone, as discussed earlier, and then to support and encourage a variety of housing stock for all ages and income levels. And then the related action items include enforcement of vacation rental housing regulations, health and safety inspections and licensure, and reevaluation of architectural review procedures and guidelines with thresholds for building permit approval. And there were a number of comments related to this, so I apologize for the smaller size on this screen, but just so that you could see all of them together. Some suggested modifications to the goals include revising the third goal, which relates to examining the establishment of mixed-use zoning, and that is while protecting the character of adjacent residentially zoned neighborhoods. And then related to goal 4, which is to support and encourage a variety of housing for all ages and income levels, to also include special needs residents with that goal. Suggested additional action items are to develop a plan to address the lack of a need for affordable workforce and senior housing alternatives. This has been mentioned previously, but to retain a consulting firm to draft the new mixed-use zoning regulations, creation of a cluster development zoning tool that provides for a range of housing types, maintaining residential housing as single use, so not multi-family, affordable, or mixed-use housing. Adopting and enforcing standards to maintain existing properties, reviewing and updating the residential code, and assembling a work group that includes a variety of representatives to help develop that mixed-use overlay zoning district. So some of those are not consistent with one another, so that's one area where some additional discussion would be helpful. And then some general comments that were provided is that the provision of affordable housing within the limits of Rehoboth may not be possible or realistic, given the build-out status of the city and its geographic area. Again, affordable housing, workforce housing, and other types of housing doesn't really present problems that have solutions, and that those would better be addressed by the county. Let's see. This person vehemently did not like the provision of additional housing, saying that the majority of housing stock currently are seasonal rentals. Let's see here. Regarding mixed use zoning, there have been some cases that have come before the Planning Commission, and that we would need to identify and incentivize a mixed zoning use, and that there are several opportunities location-wise for this use within the commercial district. Again, noting that supporting and encouraging a variety of housing stock isn't, for all ages and income levels, isn't necessarily feasible due to the amount of available land, the cost of land, et cetera. And this person noted that the survey results, it was pretty much split down the middle for related to mixed use. And then again, a comment about a mixed use overlay and how that might work. Before we do open that discussion, I do want to note that the state, and particularly the housing, of course that acronym has just left my head, but the State Housing Authority, they are going to look in the plan to see what the city's goals are related to affordable housing. So one way or another, we need to put something in the plan that addresses affordable housing and how the city can try to do its part to provide that, knowing that you're not going to completely solve this issue, but how might the city make strides to provide some kind of affordable housing. So that may be through the mixed use zoning or residential above commercial or something to that effect. But that's just something to keep in mind, that we will need some type of language within the plan. Otherwise, that's one area where, like, if the plan just says we can't accommodate affordable housing and we're not going to, that's something that will potentially keep the comprehensive plan from being certified. So with that, I will turn it back over for discussion.
Ron, this is Mike Bryan. From what the discussion we've had up until now on other topics today, and particularly what I heard from Steve Kaufman and John Dewey, it doesn't appear that the mixed use zoning concept is applicable to housing in the residential areas. I think there was a split between where that might apply, and I think Mr. Kaufman had said that, you know, that is in a commercial district, and I think Mr. Dewey was very interested in that definition. So I'm not so sure that we're not blending concepts here for really no good purpose. If we're just talking about housing, presumably we're talking in a mixed use zone, presumably we're talking about that just in the commercial district. So some of this you might be able to pull out.
I'd say some of it's a housing topic, and housing could be in a commercial district.
Right.
I agree with you. When I look at it, it's also in land use and later on the same discussion. So I think at some point we'll have to circle back and see how does it make sense and then reference it in other areas.
Yeah.
The couple points I wanted to make before we get on to commission members' topics, and it's really dovetailing on what Lauren said, you know, my plan hat again. He's right that the Office of State Housing or State Planning is going to look at this, and the Housing Authority, and I've been through it a few times with them. They are looking, basically they're looking at implementing Federal Fair Housing Act requirements. And the Community Development Plan is a key document for municipalities to help implement that. So they will look for specifically, not that the city has a proactive, that they're building affordable housing or things like that, but the red flag would be if a municipality says we're built out and they're still issuing building permits, and they're saying that it's not feasible to build workforce housing or affordable housing, even though it seems challenging, the municipalities should still express in their comprehensive plan for the future a willingness to entertain opportunities that come along or that could work. And I've been through this before with coastal towns that also have, you know, the market's not too high for most workforce housing, but opportunities do happen. So I would urge the commission to look at that and consider it, that what possible opportunities there are because of that review. The other thing I wanted to mention, and again, this is more of a technical thing, and I think Glenn can weigh in on this. When we say mixed use overlay district, as a planner, I'm a fan of overlay districts. We use them a lot in other states. Mm-hmm. But in Delaware, south of Newcastle County, overlay districts are pretty much rare. The only place you see them is if they were already in place before, or something like a historic resources overlay district. But Delaware case law has really come down and said that in each zone, it has to be consistent across the board, which effectively does away with overlay zones. So I would say I wouldn't discourage the idea. I would discourage the language. I would call it mixed use zoning classification instead of mixed use overlay districts. So if you're in Maryland or Pennsylvania, New Jersey, overlay districts are perfectly fine, but in parts of Delaware, it's just something that if you adopted this and then you said to your planner, go out and draft an overlay district, we would say, sorry, we can't. So I think the idea of mixed use is great, and I look forward to talking to you about it, but just a technical thing, I wouldn't adopt a plan in Sussex County and Rehoboth that says we're going to do overlay zones. Glenn, do you have anything?
Yeah, I agree completely, Tom. I have the same reaction when I hear overlay zone. I like the concept of all the mixed use stuff we're talking about, but there's a case called Farmers for Fairness. It was a Kent County case, probably now 10 years ago. And the county implemented some overlays that they were trying to drive development to Dover and more urban locations than things that were east of Route 1, which is mostly farmland. They basically said you couldn't do certain things, even if you were in the same zoning district, you couldn't do certain things if you're east of SR1 that you could do if you were west of SR1. And they implemented that through an overlay district. Well, the different sections within the code in Title IX addressing counties, it says that each zone has a uniformity requirement. So everything that applies to one person who's in that zone has to apply to the next person. So there are ways of implementing it, as Tom says, but the term overlay zone has really been shunned in Delaware at this point.
All right, next, Mr. Kaufman.
All right, well, first, thanks, Tom, for that clarification. I was not aware in Delaware you couldn't have an overlay zone. I don't have any problem calling it a mixed-use district. It would still have to be applied on a case-by-case basis by an owner, by a property owner. Makes it a little bit more difficult because, the city wouldn't be able to, I don't think, to identify certain key pieces of property individually, which would be eligible. What about that? Is that possible?
You could structure it so you have to meet certain thresholds of size or types of uses or things like that. But yeah, it's just you can't basically pick properties out ahead of time. And as Glenn said, there's and we'll talk about this later on. There's different zoning techniques. I mean, right now the city has a basic zoning, districts, and area and bulk standards. There's other zoning techniques like form-based and all that do allow for different variations of it.
Well, it could be a form-based zone. I mean, that would be something would be acceptable. I do want to talk about this subject. If we don't adopt something that calls for house of some type, the city will do lawsuits. There's no question that it's considered to be exclusionary zoning. And there are many, many cases, for example, in New Jersey, where cities were taken to court on that. So we definitely have to have a affordable housing aspect to our zoning ordinance and to our comprehensive development plan, which basically says we do encourage affordable housing. In terms of a mixed use zone in the residential area, nothing prevents you from having that be a separate zone from the commercial one, but you could certainly have one which would allow for, as I indicated earlier, an increase in density potentially if affordable workforce or affordable housing was provided. And it could also allow for the use of certain techniques such as cluster zoning and different types of housing. If need be, you could just develop a residential group of zones which would permit different, if they have to be totally uniform, which would permit single-family housing or townhouses or even apartments. And you could have them, again, be something that a property owner would have to apply for. But we definitely have to have something. Now, in this area, I do have some real experience. I wrote the first moderate price dwelling unit law in the country for Montgomery County in 1973. It was held as constitutional. It required an individual property owner individual developer who developed to provide a certain percentage of affordability. In return for that, they got a density bonus. I was 27 years old at the time, and that has gone on to become a national standard. So I'm pretty familiar with this area. And I definitely feel the city needs to put something in there. And I don't think that we can't get some affordable housing. We can if we provide the mixed-use type zones that allow for some increased density in the event that you provide a certain amount of affordability. In our case, I think we're really just talking about workforce housing. So that's my thought.
Okay, anyone else? Nan, you're muted.
Sorry, the screen got away from me there. Again, and I think, Mike, you referred to this before, Steve and I had a colloquy about the use of adding workforce or affordable housing to the existing business district and commercial district. And Steve, what I understood you to say there or then was that was what you were referring to, and you were not referring to basically adding higher density residential to change what are the existing residential zones. So I just want to clarify that we're still on that understanding.
Man, that's correct. That's correct. But because of what the state wants, I think the city is going to have to provide something in the residential zoned areas of the city that would allow for some affordable housing. So there's different ways to do it. You currently have, I think, 3 single-family residential zones. They're basically just all single-family detached housing. You need to have something else in the residential code that would permit affordable housing of some type. It could be new zones created, but we need to do 2 things, I think. We need to make a statement in our comprehensive development plan that recognizes this need and have an action item that could be implemented subsequent to adoption, where some new zoning category in the residential area could be adopted. But you are right. What I was talking about in terms of the mixed use, which would provide for some residential in the commercial areas, was really for the commercial areas.
Okay, and I think that requires thank you. I think that does require a lot more study and contemplation in terms of how we do go about providing more affordable housing in the context, and I certainly don't oppose that, but in the context of the particular location that we have, and whether that requires rezoning or whether it can be met with creative uses of a mixed use approach along the lines of what we've been discussing.
Okay, Barry.
Yeah, I share Nan's concern too, particularly with the residential neighborhoods. I mean, land here is so expensive. The idea of thinking one can create low-income housing that people could afford, it's an oxymoron. I mean, the time you buy the land, you're already probably outpriced 90% of the people that can afford to live there. So I think we need to focus on it being in the commercial district. I understand we have to have this in the plan to get it approved, but I am concerned about someone coming and buying a piece of land in a residential area and putting up, 5 or 6 commercial, or not commercial, but residential units, and like a townhouse of some sort. So I share the same concerns.
Okay, anyone else? John Dewey.
Mixed use is going to be a very challenging discussion. There are reasons why it may need to be considered, particularly around access to affordable workforce housing. And as always, the devil will be in the details. And there's lots of devils and lots of details on this one to work its way through. As we're discussing that and continuing to consider mixed use housing, please bear in mind that the Rehoboth Beach Homeowners Association has come down very firmly against mixed-use zoning, even just limited in the commercial district. And to open up a discussion about whether mixed use or workforce housing through creative zoning should be considered for existing residential zones, that's a very complex discussion that I will very much hesitate to participate in without this being much more open and much more participation from the community.
Well, I think what I've heard up until this point is that all mixed-use housing zoning would be in the commercial district. Is that right?
What Mr. Kaufman is opening up is a discussion about cluster housing, townhouses in the existing R1 and R2 zone. And that's a very different beast than talking about mixed use in commercial zone.
Okay, so he's talking about, and Steve certainly can articulate himself, but I think he's talking about different housing types. Is that correct, Steve?
Yes. I'm not suggesting that there be any changes in our existing single-family zones. It's a question of whether you want to create any other residential zones that would allow for a different type of housing type. For example, John, townhouses have been historically considered compatible to single-family homes. They are considered single-family homes, although they're townhouses, and they're not incompatible. And if there was a test as to compatibility in a court, they would pass compatibility. So I'm just suggesting that we put something in here that says that the city will consider some future residential zones that could provide for a mix of housing types and some affordability. I know this is a difficult subject, especially for homeowners who feel that what they have is what they want. But, and I hate to call it a NIMBY thing, but that's what it's called. And we don't want the city to be sued, and that's a problem. And if we don't do something that allows for the possibility of affordable units in the city, not just in commercial areas, there's a very strong likelihood that one, we may have difficulty getting certified, or two, we may be sued by fair housing advocates. This is something, believe me, I know is very difficult, but we can't put our head in the sand here.
Well, I would just say that this is a difficult area. And the importance of affordable housing is not necessarily the same, end goal as allowing, for example, townhouse development. I mean, if you allow development of multiple units on what would have been a single family unit, that does not necessarily produce in any meaningful way affordable housing. It doesn't necessarily produce housing that the individuals who work in the city can afford. I mean, another path to that is income criteria, for units and so forth. So, I mean, there are a lot of different, there are different competing interests here. And it may be that using units like, those in commercial areas might produce the most affordable housing, even if it doesn't increase density in what are currently residential areas. I mean, it's just a very complex area. And I don't want one goal to be stated that would not, in fact, that would lead to change that would not, in fact, be very effective in reaching that goal. And so I agree with John that it's and I think everyone agrees it's a complicated area, and I think we have to proceed carefully. My goal here is not to diminish the importance of affordable housing, but more to ensure that that what gets produced is in fact affordable, if that's going to be our goal. And I think the concerns that the state has, I support those concerns, and I support the importance of affordability. But I don't support just producing more opportunities for sales and development on the assumption that that's going to lead to affordability.
Tom West.
Let me just try one last time. First of all, we're conflicting two things here. The unit types is one thing, the affordability is another. For example, in a single family zone, you could have smaller lots or smaller houses that would be more affordable. So as Barry was indicating before, if you buy a lot in the day, it's way beyond the affordability of almost anybody, even middle-class people. But if you had another section of your residential zones that allowed for smaller lots, for smaller houses, you could do that. Now, unfortunately, usually that's like you could have a 2,000 square foot lot rather than a 5,000 foot lot, but usually that's a townhouse. But it could, under today's creative actual people, there's a lot of smaller homes that are being created, which are 1,000 square feet or 1,200 square feet, which would be more affordable. So, I understand the issue, but there are ways in which it could be addressed. Shouldn't be too, shall we say, desirable by the residential communities that already exist in the city. I'd like to hear from Tom on this, and maybe even Glenn, because I'm certain Tom knows what I'm talking about here.
I'd say that, my experience is that, I want to share two ideas with you. One is it's good to provide different housing options for different groups. Affordability is one. People who can't take care of, who want to still live in the community and can't maintain single family homes. So there's a lot of reasons for having different options. The other thing I think from a planning standpoint is that if you have a community that has a lot of businesses, that has a workforce, and that workforce has to drive into your community each day, it's creating commuting problems. And we talk in other parts of the plan where traffic congestion and parking are big problems. So this is another way of addressing that kind of a symptom. I'm not aware that the state requires to have affordable housing in residential zones. They just require opportunities for each community to come up with ways that might work in your community. When I've worked in other communities that have very expensive housing values, even providing townhouses may not meet those thresholds, which are identified in the draft that Lauren's created. So when she puts in the draft has numbers for what's affordable or what's workforce and how many people are in a family, I would doubt that even if townhouses are built in a city like Rehoboth, they're going to fall below those thresholds. But I have worked in other communities where they've come up with a way to build housing, but usually they have a partner. A developer works with Diamond State Housing Trust or someone else who comes in and provides low-cost financing and support for families that meet those criteria. So there are opportunities out there. They get more and more complicated. But the long story, or the short story is, I think Rehoboth just needs to move away from we don't have to do anything to we have to open up that there may be opportunities in the next 10 years for someone to come along and has an idea that works within our land uses and our housing goals to provide an option that's more affordable for workforces, which can address some of the issues Rehoboth's facing, like I mentioned, traffic congestion, parking, other things, and provide opportunities for your community to have people who work in your community, live in your community, and don't have to commute in or respond. So those are my thoughts, Mr. Kaufman. I don't know, there's other ones on it, but it's a complicated issue, but one you're going to have to address. The other part is what works within your own goals and objectives, I guess.
Oh, that was very helpful.
agree. Yes, I agree. That was very helpful, and I support a number of things that Tom suggested.
Yeah, that was definitely helpful. If we don't have to do it in residential, and we can do it in the commercial, I certainly understand that, and I certainly understand, how difficult it is to buy anything in Rehoboth these days. But I do think we do need a statement along the 10-year, prediction. The brothers, the big developer here,
John Brothers.
they did a thing similar to what Tom was saying with the city of Lewis, where they put in a number of workforce housing. And I've worked with developers over the years that do that too, where they would come in and support a housing opportunities commission or whatever, and develop the property and provide some affordable housing as well. We do, just as a note, we do have some fairly large parcels still in the city that haven't been totally developed. For example, the one there that was cabins and apartments along Scarborough, right where it meets Rehoboth Avenue. I forget what it's called. That's a big piece. I say again.
The Hall. It's called the Hall.
HAL. Right.
That was the former Walls Apartments.
Walls.
Right.
Right.
Right. That could be something. My understanding is it will probably be developed as single family lots. Maybe it may be too far gone, but I agree with what Tom said. I think it was very helpful. And as long as we put some statements in there that provide for an opportunity along the lines. Now, it has to be meaningful, though. You can't just throw it in there and say, forget it. You can't do that. But I think we've had a long discussion on this, and I've said a lot, and I apologize.
And I'm sure that there are nonprofit organizations, housing organizations that exist in Delaware as they do in other states, with which the city could partner to think through some of these issues.
Mr. Ellison.
Yeah, I think speaking of partnering, not only with those kinds of organizations, but I think however we resolve the language in the report that has to do with inside Rehoboth Beach, I think we also need to forcefully call for ongoing collaboration with Sussex County and perhaps even other municipalities around these issues of affordable and workforce housing. And I think that ought to be in the report.
Agree with that.
Yes, and I guess the question would be, Lauren Good, we talk about that in the annexation chapter, but should we also have that reference here? Is that correct?
We can definitely include that, and it does make sense to do so. And I will just note that State Housing provided some comments a while ago when they took a look at the 2010 plan, just noting that this discussion could should really just reflect a willingness to facilitate affordable housing opportunities, and that could be done through either the land use regulations that have already been discussed, the partnerships, or various policies and programs. They did note potential partnerships with the Diamond State Community Land Trust, who could potentially have contractual agreements for a long-term affordability restriction on units that are set aside for that. They also noted an example of permitting accessory dwelling units in residential areas. I understand that's in a whole other can of worms, and that's something that if the intent is to use those for affordable or workforce housing, it would have to be clear that they're not not for seasonal rentals or things of that nature. But there's a whole different can of worms if you begin that discussion. So Sussex County, or I'm sorry, State Housing did provide a number of those types of strategies, and I can also look into how some of the other neighboring municipalities attempted to address this in their comprehensive plans, and follow up with State Housing for any additional recommendations or examples that they may have that may be of interest in pursuit.
Okay. Yes, John Dewey.
Just a quick question for Lauren. I don't know if you would have access to what other similar, very small communities may be looking at for theirs. What's North Shores putting into their plan? What's Henlopen putting in theirs? So as much information as you could provide with communities who are similarly landlocked with very, very high lot values, that would be helpful.
I will see what I can find.
All right. Next topic, please. Looks like we have some work to do on that one. Next topic, please.
The next topic relates to historic resources. Existing goals include protecting historic and characteristic structures, preserving the overall character and small town charm, increasing public awareness and appreciation of historic properties and other special places, strengthening and identifying funding sources and incentives for historic preservation, supporting and further identifying the economic and social impacts of arts, cultural, and historic resources in and near the city, and protecting, enhancing, and extending the benefit of cultural resources for future generations. Related action items were to encourage the use of tax credit programs for restoring historic buildings. Those may be available at the federal or state level, depending on a particular budget cycle. Assisting government agencies and organizations with educational awareness and promotion of historic rehabilitation grants and programs. Continuing to support events and activities, promoting inclusion for all within the community, and increasing communication and collaboration with community organizations to promote and host inclusionary events within and for the community. So some additional suggested action items are to prioritize implementation of public facility accessibility improvements. A note that the traditional cottages should be preserved, whether that is through historic architectural controls or incentives to encourage that preservation. Giving consideration to enacting a historic preservation regulation or law, and the creation of historic districts and protection of historically significant structures. And some general comments include a stronger recognition that the city is still interested in this preservation interest, and that there's also comment about demolition of historic buildings without an attempt to save those resources, but any attempt to do so is met with arguments about property rights. And then a note that without strong historic preservation legislation, there won't be much achieved regarding historic preservation. Go ahead and turn that back over for discussion.
Okay. Anyone have any thoughts?
I think the issue here, the difficult issue, is what is historic and what is not historic, and who makes that determination. Because a building's old, does that make it historic? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I know personally, when we bought our house here, it was built in the 1920s. We had to tear it. We did tear it down because of family needs, but when we did, had asbestos in it, lead paint, mold. I don't see how anyone could call that building historic. So I want to, who determines what is historic, and how do you enforce or pay for someone to maintain that cottage look, if you will?
Tom West, do you have any thoughts on that? I know on historic preservation, there's an age factor, but also a contributing factor. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, the text that you have provides a pretty good overview and a map of showing by age. But when you start getting into, and there's a state law that you have to follow if you start regulating historic resources. You have to have a review commission that meets certain criteria, and the properties have to be within a district. And a lot of times what you do is you're looking for people to opt into the district. So if you have property owners that are really just not interested in being part of that district, I think that there are ways to craft the districts that meet that. I think that we're getting back into a balancing act of, and I've some of the comments, especially the latter two, are reflecting that the 2010 plan talks about, and this new draft talks about the importance of historic resources, but yet there's not really anything tangible that happens with, besides encouraging or recommending they get tax incentives or things like that. So I think this is one of those policy areas that it's really important that we try to provide, to figure out what works or what doesn't work, and then come up with a clear, consistent policy. But there is pretty straightforward ways to set up a review process. The review process, once it's set up, there's pretty consistent standards. They're called the from the Secretary of Interior, of what can and cannot be reviewed. And then there's a review process that's fairly straightforward to go through. So that's what I know about review processes for historic resources in Delaware.
Doesn't the local agencies, if you set up this type of review commission or whatnot, aren't they simply tasked with implementing the federal standards, the National Park Service standards?
Well, they have to follow the standards, and then they interpret the standards. They can, I'm not an expert in this. They may be able to, I don't think they can add to them, but they can refine them, like types of fences or things like that. But back to Mr. Covington's point of what's historic and what's not.
Right.
There are classifications. For instance, in your text, it says buildings that have been moved may not meet that classification. I forget the term for it, just because they're older. And again, there's also ways that if a building is beyond repair, that the homeowner is given the ability to demolish it, but you have to go through the review process to make sure it's at that standard.
Jim Morris.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, Jim.
Yeah, I'm still chair of the State Historic Preservation Review Board. And I can tell you that the main thing that is required for anything to move forward is the profound interest of a small group or even an individual in working to save and to have listed on the register any property, whether it's residential or of any sort. And, my experience here is different than what I see in other areas, even within the state. I don't see any interest whatsoever here, frankly, in pursuing that. I had some discussions with some individuals about possibility of trying to consider and potentially nominate portions of the boardwalk or just funland. And those are still underway, but the state office is not going to do all the hard work. All the research has to be done by local individuals or a small team that are so excited about this that they will pursue it. It's the only way it's going to happen. And I don't know in this city, I think back to when we were putting together the architectural standards or the review manual, we ran into such opposition from the property rights folks. And that's one of the reasons that we were unable to carry it further beyond just simply a wonderful set of guidelines that anyone can use that appear somewhere, on the website. So I just don't have much of a positive notion about this, other than that I think we can leave some language in there that talks about, how wonderful historic resources are and so forth. But I think we also need to be realistic that not a lot, I think, is going to happen in Rehoboth.
Anyone else? Steve Kaufman, I thought you were a mixed-use man, not in the.
I'm a lot of things. Anyway, I agree totally with James here. I'm the one that wrote a thing about the historic preservation legislation. It's quite simple. Without a strong historic preservation piece of legislation, very little is going to happen. Maybe you would get, for example, a group to if somebody bought Funland and wanted to tear it down, you might get a group to come forward to make it a historic property. That would require legislation just by itself. So I'm all for historic preservation for the right things. Not everything should be preserved. But for example, you've got that big old hotel on Main Street. That could be a historic preservation and renovated for workforce housing at some point. But I think James is absolutely right here. We're not going to get anywhere, and we're not going to get a piece of legislation, so we should put something in there that just encourages it.
Anyone else? Tom, West?
Well, there are, I've seen in other communities where they have neighborhoods of older homes that they don't go to the level of historic architectural review for window types and colors, but they are addressing the scale and the other aspects of it to try and keep it consistent. Like some of the discussions that Lauren went through, I think one was about the cottage scale. And I know Rehoboth's already done work of addressing the scale of housing to try and maintain that character of residential neighborhoods. So there are some communities that don't have a full historic architectural review board or a HARB, but they still have a historic commission that helps to work with property owners and provide guidance, and then also to provide, especially to homeowners who want to remodel or redeveloping a house, and they're looking for, they're not going to meet the same standards, but they're going to build within the character of that neighborhood. So you already have a lot of information that talks about the styles in Rehoboth. I'm just thinking that you have a lot that's there. You don't have to do an inventory to work with property owners the way Mr. Ellison's talking about if you went out and inventoried them all and regulated them. But it's something to consider, more so than maybe what is going on right now, that you just have this document that's there for working with and reference. The other thing I wanted to mention is, and we're not there yet about talking about what new zoning or zoning techniques might happen in the city. There's been the term incentives talked about for a few things. And one of the other terms, Mr. Kaufman just brought it up, is adaptive reuse. So there are ways to, outside of a formal adopting districts and designations, to still use standards for buildings that have a historic character and incentivizing them or for redevelopment. So it's probably, there are in-between grounds to work with.
Anyone else? Mr. Ellison, is there a Rehoboth Historic Preservation Society of some type?
No, there isn't. The closest thing to it is the museum. There has been some interest in that quarter for paying more attention to, the historic residences and other buildings in town, but nothing that is specifically aimed at, historic preservation resources.
So I just to follow up on that. The house next door to me was built in 1928, and it has a little plaque on it. Rehoboth Beach Historic Association, circa 1928. Did they just buy that plaque and put it on, or was that issued by the city? Does anyone know?
Julie Davis is with us right now.
Yes, so I finally got into the meeting. I'm sorry to be late. Our house on Norfolk Street, our old house, we lived in it for 25 years. But that process was done, or is available through the the Rehoboth Beach Museum. And I assume they are still doing it. But our house was built at 9 Norfolk Street, and it was built in 1935. And we went to the land records of Sussex County and got a copy of the original deeds showing when it was constructed. I don't think there was, I don't know, can't remember now, this was a while ago, whether we tried to get something from the city's building and licensing department, but I remember specifically going over to Georgetown and getting a copy of a deed from 1935, because it had been just a lot and it was purchased and then the house was built. And the Historic Museum presentation of the deed, and I think we might have paid $100 for the plaque, but it was through the museum program that we got our plaque.
Mr. Ellison, just a question. Was Rehoboth mapped by the Sanborn Insurance Company? Those maps are what are very prevalent here and very determinative. If you're on the Sanborn map, it will tell you when your house was built.
Yeah, I don't know that. I do know that Nancy Alexander at the museum would surely know that in an instant, but I don't know that.
Well, I promise I'll stop asking these questions.
No, it's okay. One thing that I certainly would encourage, I don't want to come down so negatively about all of this. I think they're closing me in here. The lights are going out.
You have to stay on and bring Julie up to date on everything that's happened up to now.
Well, yeah, and there's been no air conditioning in here, so it's getting dark in here. I would be willing to have us say something in the report about pursuing the possibility of, in cooperation with the museum perhaps, of pursuing whether it would make sense to move forward with establishing some kind of a historic preservation board, not to be a limiting board, but to simply raise awareness and to do everything that we could possibly do along that line.
Is there a consensus among the group to move forward on that?
I think it's a great idea.
I agree.
Okay. All right.
Got my lights back.
Yes.
Just now you need air conditioning.
Yeah. There are limits, Jim, to what you can get.
Right.
All right. Lauren Good, are you available?
Yes. All right. Let's see. The next topic is economic development. So here, the existing goals are to encourage creative redevelopment of selected properties on Rehoboth Avenue and other commercial areas, increase the commercial viability and attractiveness of Wilmington and Baltimore Avenues and First Street, increase economic redevelopment collaboration among private and public partnerships to provide a variety of commercial and service establishments, and to protect the character of distinctive groupings of buildings and streetscapes. And the related existing action items are to continue promoting and supporting economic development programs and incentives provided by government agencies and organizations, support outdoor dining businesses, continue to reevaluate the code and regulations to remove barriers and hurdles that may exist for redevelopment, and to continue to promote and evaluate the need to address parking during peak season and promote transit as an alternative to vehicular transportation. So again, quite a number of comments regarding economic development. So here, related to protecting the character of distinctive groupings of buildings and streetscapes, that goal, the suggested modification was to add neighborhoods along with buildings and streetscapes. And then there were some suggested additional action items, which include, rather than the current language of supporting outdoor dining businesses, it would be to revise that to evaluate the best ways to accommodate outdoor dining. And then again, revising the item to evaluate the code and regulations to remove barriers or hurdles, to revise that to include providing clear and transparent code regulations and definitions. Other suggested items include developing greater coordination between the Chamber of Commerce, along with the general building and development community, for consistent coordination efforts, and perhaps a committee among the city and county to address various issues. Have some targeted marketing efforts, creating a business council, leveraging Main Street and the Chamber to promote and retain businesses and ensure occupancy, reviewing and updating the code, partnering with some commercial developers to guide and consult for projects and ensure that those have momentum and can cycle through the city processes in a reasonable period. Allowing some additional outdoor bar and restaurants, both in and out of season. Maintaining the cleanliness, safety, and occupancy along the boardwalk, and then enforcing the code and improvements to existing buildings. And then some general comments included the significant amount of work that would be needed for an overhaul of the city code, or just a review of the city code, and that if that occurs, input from the business and development community and the public would be needed. Let's see. Making sure that however the plan is written, that it is not, it shouldn't be noted, it shouldn't be used or written as such to mean that the current code is rigid or inflexible, and just because of the language used, that would cause a hardship in the redevelopment process. Seeing how with the impacts we've seen from COVID and the way that vacations occur, perhaps undertaking a study to understand destination vacations and projecting tourist volume and the services that that traveling public would be looking for. Let's see here. Again, additional cooperation between the city and businesses. A note about the Streetscape project, the Wilmington Baltimore Streetscape project, and parking impacts. Some of the city ordinances are outdated. And then again, going back to COVID and how it's changed the city, and what will that mean for economic development. So a lot of different items here. And open that back up for conversation.
I just want to raise the question for the group. We're at 4:13 according to my computer. We have a drop dead time of I guess either when Jim Ellison is chased out of the the city council room, or certainly no later than 4:30, because we have staff who appropriately plan to leave at that time. This is obviously going to be a lengthy discussion. And I just wonder if the coherence of the discussion might be better if we started, at our next session with this, because I cannot imagine that we're going to finish it in 14 minutes.
I agree with that, Nan. I was just getting ready to bring that up, that topic, assuming that Jim Ellison is not a hostage and we have to stay around to get him out. But I do think that perhaps it would be a time better spent at the next meeting. We are, again, I would point out, we're meeting today, the 6th, we're meeting again on the 10th, and we're meeting on the 15th with the Board of Commissioners. And if we need to schedule one more meeting or whatever it takes to get us over the goal line, I'm certainly glad to do that. I think we made some good progress today, but the next draft is coming out here very shortly. And again, to emphasize that the draft will be released on November 21st for public comment. I want to make.
I think you mean December 21st.
Yes, December. I'm sorry, December 21st. Yes, I want to point that out again. That would release draft plan number 3 for public review and comment. That will also be released to the Planning Commission and the Board of Commissioners. So I think we made good progress today. I would entertain a motion to adjourn at this time, absent anything else that we need to briefly touch on, and we will start our work again on Friday.
I will second Nan's motion to adjourn.
Okay.
Mike, can I ask one question?
Yes, sir.
What time are we starting on the 15th with the Board of Commissioners?
That's a great question, and let me check my schedule.
I don't have it in
10
my.
o'clock.
10 a.m.
I'm sorry.
10 a.m.
10 o'clock.
10 o'clock.
Okay.
Yes.
I don't have it in my calendar right now. Thank you.
Okay.
And may I ask a question?
Of course.
To Lauren? The slide that you showed, Lauren, with the goals and action items, and I should know the answer to this question, and I apologize that I don't, or I think I should probably know it. But are those goals and action items taken straight from the 2010 plan, as much of this material that we've seen along the way has been taken from the 2010? And if not, what is the origin of those action items and goals?
I would say for the most part, the goals and action items were reviewed by the Planning Commission back at the very start of this project under KCI. And at that point, the Planning Commission members were asked to provide comments on whether the goals were still relevant and whether they wanted those to be kept in the plan, and if there were any additional goals or revisions that people would like to see. In addition, there was an action item status review where the various action items in the 2010 plan were, we not only had the 2015 status update, but then an additional current status was provided. And that was, again, with input from the Planning Commission members. So before Wallace Montgomery came on board, the goals and action items were developed. So we've made some modifications to them, but and by that I mean we've made some modifications to those that were in the draft that we received from KCI. But in general, these are the goals and action items that they had prepared based on the previous goal and action item status review and any discussions that they had had with the Planning Commission over the past several years.
Right, that's the prior.
So we fully know that there are additions and changes to these that are expected, but we wanted to make sure to have that discussion with you all before just going ahead and making any major modifications to anything in this, particularly related to the goals and action items.
Thank you. That explains and confirms what I thought was the case, that those goals and action items have changed considerably since the 2010 list of goals and action items, for better or worse.
But the planning commission comments on each of these things are the ones that we gave them in the first review, which
Right.
they are listing. Yeah, right.
This is the first time that this planning commission, if I may, given the changes in personnel, will have looked at those goals and action items, evaluated them, and discussed them.
Right.
Thank
All
you.
right. Anything else? We have a motion and a second to adjourn. You all in favor? Anybody object?
Aye.
Okay, we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you Friday.
Bye-bye.